exceptional speaker. He's got 20 plus years of experience in the industry. He's worked for Microsoft in leading the development of the next version of Visual Studio. He's worked for Autodesk, leading an organization of 1,200 people and $2.5 billion in revenue. Okay, we have with us today, please welcome the Executive Vice President of Product for MarkLogic, Gary Lang.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm Gary Lang. I'm from MarkLogic. I've been with the company now almost exactly 1 year. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I ended up at the company, because I think it's instructive to what you're about to see. I was contacted by the CEO, I'm going to say in May of last year, and he said, hey, I've left Autodesk. He ran our sales group, and he said, our sales division. He had the only group bigger than mine. He said, I want you to come and look at this thing I'm being CEO because I think it's really interesting. He gave me the name, and I said, isn't that XML company? How many people have heard of MarkLogic before? Okay, it's kind of sparse. I'd love to talk to you. Why? Because I had a dim knowledge that it was an XML database company, XML server company, and that was about it. And at Microsoft, everything that you do, every PowerPoint, everything that you write gets archived somewhere and indexed by a massive SharePoint database accessible by 150,000 people. So I went under and looked, and I found two references, and they said, it looks like it sits alongside SQL Server. It doesn't compete with us in any way, shape, or form. Sounds great to me. So I thought, I still don't understand what this thing is. So I went down and looked at it, and I started to understand that, my gosh, this is a NoSQL database, but it's unlike any other one I had looked at for the previous 2 years. And I was kind of puzzled by that. And so therein lies the opportunity to me, which is to make this great technology available in a way that's consumable by everybody who's interested in all those other databases that were mentioned here during the previous the Swagger Award. And so that's what I came to board to do, because I think it has enormous potential. Things I discovered about it kind of confirmed my belief in the wonderfulness of the technology. I'll give you an example. I went to Strata earlier this year. Michael Baum, who's the founder of Splunk, I don't know if folks know who he is, and I've known him for years. And he invited me to this dinner of NoSQL luminaries, or whatever you want to call it, CTOs, CEOs, and things like that. So I went to this dinner, and we went around to do our introductions. And people said, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm from CouchDB, I'm from wherever. The Couch guy told me he was rewriting their product from Erlang to C, which ours is written already, so I made fun of him for that. The Mongo guy was there. I teased them a bit, but I kind of wondered if people heard this. So I stood up and said, hi, I'm Gary Lang. I'm from MarkLogic. We've been doing big data for 10 years, and we're welcome to have you. And everybody clapped. Because what I found out at this dinner was people were really aware of us. Because even though we haven't done such a great job under previous management in telling our story, and also our technology, the presentability of it, I think had some issues, which I'll talk about here. In spite of all that, the people that are actually building these things know damn well what we do. We do the same thing that they do, only using it. And in fact, if you aggregated all their revenue at the time, it would be about a quarter of ours. But it's not a well-known story. I met with my old colleagues at Microsoft about a month ago to talk about doing some Azure services with them. They've launched some things with Hadoop, not Hadoop, actually Hadoop, but also MongoDB. And I was talking about what we did. They were blown away by the fact that we had more revenue than Mongo. So there's a general lack of awareness about us that's belied by what you'll see in the story today. That's why I'm at MarkLogic. That's why I'm excited. And I think what you're going to see now that we've done some of the things we're doing, in terms of new management, new technology, new marketing teams, and things like that, you're going to start hearing a steady drumbeat of things from us over the next year. So it's going to be really great here for MarkLogic. This is the thing that really blew me away when I came to the company. Those logos, you see these on all the websites, but these people have paid us millions of dollars for the applications that you see here. The kind of things you expect from big data applications. They go and they pour all their operational data into the system, they convert to it. They don't keep it where it is. They actually move it to MarkLogic, and they operate on it from thenceforward. But it has all the data, all the characteristics that you expect from big data systems, which is you can mine it, you can report it, you can analyze it, things like that. In the meantime, you're still operating against it. There's no warehouse and operational systems. So these are the kinds of things these folks do with MarkLogic. It's all the stuff you expect, but it's the reason they pay us the money they pay us. It's the reason why the company's continuing to grow the way we are. I'll give you some examples here. I'll go through them really quickly. Warner Brothers, they do a thing where they take all their assets, scripts, films, videos, you name it, and they port it into the system. They have normal digital asset management systems for management by content authoring and manipulation. But what they wanted to do is let the business people get at this stuff. So that what you can do is you look at this stuff and you see all these workflows where they're indexing the metadata, and what they want to do is monetize for business reasons what the content represents. So for example, there's a film called Demolition Man. I don't know if people remember this film. It's a really good example because you see in this film where Sylvester Stallone's driving down the road with a really young Sandra Bullock. It's about 20 years ago. And they're talking about, it's in the future, and they say, well, he says, where are you taking me? She says, I'm taking you to Taco Bell. It's the only franchise left standing after the franchise wars. So they go to this futuristic Taco Bell, and you see this place, it's got the indicia of the logo, but everything's in the future. There are no other chains. That's the only chain left. They've all been destroyed. That was a really good thing, but when they wanted to move the film to Europe, there are no Taco Bells in Europe. They do have Burger Kings, though, so Burger King would be really interested in the product placement for that film. So with this solution, you go and you look this up, find all the instances of Taco Bell and replace it with Burger King, and you look for content to draw from to make advertising for. And that's the kind of thing they do with the system all the time. So it's money just sort of buried within their content. Were people having trouble hearing me anyway?
A little bit.
Because I can speak louder. Okay, I'll do that. Another one, we're not allowed to use names, but they're one of the top 5 trading banks. And what they've done is they have, I'm going to say, 20 different systems to store their derivatives contracts. And the reason they have 20 is they're legal contracts stored in a structured document format, and they all have effectively 20 different schemas, right? And so they would actually go to each of these systems and interrogate them when they needed to do so when asked to look things up. What we did was we built a system for them. Because we have as-is content loading, you don't specify a schema ahead of time, it's XML. The documents themselves carry their own structure with them, import into MarkLogic, and one system serves up a single source of truth to that company. So we eliminated these 20 databases they put into one system. Obviously, they can ask questions and answers much quicker because they don't have to go to 20 different systems. They don't have to rework it every time a new contract format comes in, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of other stuff in here. 1 DB8 versus 10, that's really true. One system versus 20. So this actually is an often told story at MarkLogic. In fact, it's told so often that I worry about it. The story that was told me when I came in before the company was, typically we replace somebody's attempt to do a NoSQL thing in SQL, usually Oracle. We come in and we do it in 1/10 the amount of time. It's 10 times as fast, and we charge 1/10 the price. And I always say, that's always great. Can't it be half the price? Okay, now this is really better known as Big Search Provider. This is a company that provides legal and business search engine functionality. They've done it for 20 years. And, they wanted to move the thing forward. It was built on a mainframe that they had for 30 years. Very good system, but not scalable to what they wanted to do, and the cost was really expensive. So what they wanted to do is move forward with a more modern technology. They've tried to do this over the last 10 years, and they just couldn't find any other system to do it. They tried fast, they tried Lucene, they tried this, they tried that. They wrote their own code 3 or 4 times, they acquired companies. When they saw what we had, the head architect looked at another guy and said, I think this is what we've been trying to do for 10 years, isn't it? The guy said, I think so. So they went with us. They've got an incredible system running. When they want to create a new application on this thing, and they do it all the time, it takes them a couple of weeks rather than 9 months, because it's very flexible. It uses kind of the web tools, agile tools that everybody in this room is probably familiar with. They were not. They are now, and then you get the results that you see there. They're not moving off the system. If anything, they're expanding their work with us. We really love working with them. How many people here went to the BBC site to look at the Olympics this last summer? So I just came from London, and about 2 weeks ago, I gave the same talk. And these people were ecstatic about this thing because it let you do something that I'd actually never seen before. Backing up a bit, MarkLogic is really good at what's called faceted search. So everything you can look up has a number of different facets. And what these guys did was they layered on some semantic technology on top of MarkLogic and used that as a framework for setting up a virtually unlimited amount of tagging against every element stored in the database. And then they decided which elements they wanted to pick. They let users navigate the content through that. So for example, if you're interested in a particular track star, you look for that track star, and you watch everything that track star is doing. If you're interested in track and field in general, you can look at that. If you're interested in a team from Birmingham or the United States, you can look at that. By sport, by athlete, by nude, by origin, any of these facets were available to you. And in fact, it was spread all over the place. People have very different ways of looking at this kind of information, and this system let them do it without coding it up ahead of time. I think it's a total of 1,600 different facets were on average what people used. And the idea was to turn it into a social thing so that people tended to converge on the elements of the facet that they were interested in. All right, let's see what's got here. These are the big numbers: 55 million browsers, daily record of 9 million global browsers, 160 million requests. And what's interesting for me is that these guys upgraded in a very short period of time before they launched the site. The system worked just fine. On the busiest day, they served up 2.8 petabytes worth of information. Our product doesn't break a sweat. I'll tell you why. Okay, so here's the infrastructure that our product has. And I will say that it's had this for at least half a decade. This is why I'm really excited to be at the company, because everybody's going to know this soon. Obviously, we're a database. I don't know how many people understood that we're a database. I kind of thought we were a searchy XML thing myself. Then it has search, because the founder came from UltraSeek. He was the architect of UltraSeek, the two founders actually. The other one came from Google. And so it's a very extensive search capabilities built into the product. I recently met with the CTO of eBay, and they're talking about building a system called Cassini, which, it's a real shame we hadn't talked to them earlier, because they said, well, we're spending hundreds of people spending millions of dollars building a system where instead of just indexing the description and one more field and then scanning for the rest after we get the results from that, we want to index all 15 fields and search against them as if the search operators could be applied to each of them. And those would mean hundreds of different search operators, et cetera, et cetera. So they're building the system from scratch. We actually have that in our box already, so they were kind of disappointed they hadn't heard this. That's our job to make sure that folks like that need us, hear of us earlier. And finally, we have an application server. This is a little well-known thing. We have an HTTP server built into the product. You can write your applications. And the way you would write these applications was in a language called xquery. So actually, that is another way to extend the MarkLogic server. So whoever said that, I have some swag for you.
I did.
Okay, I'll get you some. Okay? That's MarkLogic. All of those three things at once. You can use any one of those components that you want. It's just interesting to have all those in one space, particularly for a big data system, because having all those in one process means top performance. There's no network latency between this tier and this tier or any of that stuff, if that's what you want. If you want to continue to work the way you're normally used to, you can do that too. Our assertion is that MarkLogic is the only enterprise NoSQL database. We do the big data search that I talked about earlier. Jim? Where are we? Cassie? He knows what it is. We have high availability, we have replication. We have two forms of replication actually, an HTTP version, which lets you do it across versions, if you so desire, and real-time one in sort of normal sense of these things. Point-in-time recovery, government-grade security. If you're in red fans, we can call it something else, but it was designed for the government so that they can use the system for the kind of applications that you might have imagined people want to use for our system since 9/1. And then we've done a thing which we call real-time here to do. But this is kind of everything, I would say, over the next year. Maybe even today there'll be some announcements this week at Duke World. What NoSQL vendors want to do is real-time to do. HBase actually named one of their conferences with that moniker. We've already done this. We've had the typical connector out since November of last year. And what that lets you do is to move stuff in and out of MarkLogic at warp speed. It basically bumps up ingestion by a factor of 10 to our product. And then what we have is BI integration. Very few NoSQLs have the level of BI integration that we have. We just met with the Tableau folks. They were kind of blown away with how much they could do with MarkLogic with their tool. They have a bunch of hacks around XML and a bunch of other things that they've used. But you very quickly get into a problem when you're bringing in huge amounts of XML spit out of a relational database. Where does it sit? Does it sit in the RAM? Does it sit in the server? In order to connect to it, we go to BC and it just works. Now, that's what MarkLogic has had all the time. And here's another way of thinking about it. It's powerful, we're trusted, flexible indexes. So any attribute value pair in the system is indexed the way you expect for query. Any full text is indexed the way you expect for a search engine. all the normal search operators that you expect, and then some out of a fast or autonomy or in our system. We're schema agnostic because we're based on the XML data model. We just throw stuff in there and we index it. We added analytic functions this release, so what that means is if you want to perform statistical functions, you can do so directly in the product. We added these functions directly. The thing that's not up here, I don't think, and I probably should have had in the previous slide, is that we have a shared nothing architecture, like most of the modern systems you know about. And we've had it since day one. This is a notion that's been around since 1983, but it's absolutely required for the kind of scalability that people require for these kinds of applications today. And we've had it forever. So what that means is when you execute a statistical function over a range of data, the function is essentially pushed down to the data nodes and executed close to the data. You don't bring all this data somewhere across the network, evaluate it, and then give the answer back, because that would be time-consuming and expensive. You do it down at the data layer. This is what all modern systems do or should do, and it's a lot of things you see some older vendors working on today. When you make a relational database better, this is kind of one of the first things they do is try and add a shared nothing architecture. We do have a Hadoop distribution. We announced it at Strata earlier this year. Effectively, what that does is it says we have a Hadoop connector, and we're starting to get really serious about Hadoop. We made an announcement today that I'll talk about a little bit. And we wanted a partner to work on it because we need somebody that not only is there to support it, because it's now part of our product, but also because what we're doing with Hadoop is a little bit groundbreaking, a little bit anticipatory of what we're being asked to do, which is to use it for long-term storage for an operational database system. I'll talk about that a bit later. Geospatial, we added that in the last release. Almost nobody else has that. I ran the geospatial division at Autodesk. We're the #3 geospatial vendor, and it's very hard to do that well, and this company did a great job of it. And it's integrated with all the other stuff we talked about, which is really unusual. Usually that stuff is tacked on the relational database. That's what we did at Autodesk. We've added a thing called in-database MapReduce. And what that is a realization by me sitting down with the team. You know, my first week I asked for a chalk top. Walk me through the architecture of MarkLogic. What's the life of a query? And in fact, it got executed the way I described it to you earlier. You issue the query with one node, it goes to a node, then it goes down to the data nodes, and it executes components of the query, brings back the results, aggregates them, and sends it back up. And I said to her, gee, that looks a lot like, she said, MapReduce. And well, really that's how you execute in systems like this. There's nothing really magical about it, but why don't we expose it to people? I didn't think about it much more than that, but then one of our guys looked at it and said, I've done it. Because he was charged with doing UDFs. And the notion is, if you're going to write UDFs, why not do it that way? It's a paradigm that everybody understands, and it's really a paradigm that fits on shared nothing architectures. Just writing a function call is not that hard, but doing that is really interesting. So that was actually the C part, and that guy got inspired for that. The current implementation is you write C++ or C functions as a MapReduce function in the normal way. We take care of the orchestration and the invocation of the function and the gathering results and all that stuff. We just do all that for you, just like Hadoop does for Java. Let's see, visualization widgets. I'll talk about that later. ACID transactions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing we added this release that's going to make a difference, I think, and it probably makes a difference for people here, is we changed what Microsoft would call the surface area of MarkLogic. The surface area before was X-query. You had to learn X-query. You had to become an X-query guy to get involved, to get familiar with our system. How many people know X-query? Holy crap. That's it. Wait a minute. MarkLogicians raised their hand. That doesn't count. Okay. You know, I definitely heard of it, right? There's internet books on Amazon. It's a known thing. It was kind of got popular in the early 2000s, and it's really good for this kind of data. It didn't win, but it's really the best way of processing this kind of data. But rather than try and force people to wave the flag for a language that's hard to get people to adopt, I know because I ran the F# group, I thought it was the best language that I worked on. It didn't matter. You know, people want C# and Visual Basic. So what we've done is we've created a surface area over MarkLogic based on REST. And we've provided almost all of the capabilities of MarkLogic through the REST API, including our search API, which is very hard to do. In fact, that top 5 bank that I talked about thinks they've put a layer over us that makes it easy for us to swap out. But if you look at the layer over our search API, it's a MarkLogic search API. So unless there's another product that implements that whole thing, it's going to be very hard to switch. That API is very, very powerful. And then we added the Java layer on top of that. And that part, you know, it's profound, but it's not that hard to do. So we can do C# interface, PHP, and kind of wrap it around. now they have that REST API. That's huge because what that means is that 9 million programmers now only program MarkLogic instead of 1% of the people that raise their hands in the room. The other thing we added, because it's getting more and more popular, particularly for smaller pieces of things that look like documents, is JSON. At Microsoft, what we analyzed this carefully because almost everything we did was based on XML. We determined that people were replacing the XML RPC scenarios with JSON just because a lot of that stuff was starting to originate in the browser. JavaScript was in its ascendancy. We added a lot of that tooling to Visual Studio, as you saw, and Windows 8. So we had to do something with it. And MarkLogic has to do something with it. So in this release, we've added native JSON storage. This wasn't written in the X-query of the server. This is in the kernel of the server itself. So it's wicked fast. We added a lot of the stuff that you see up there about visualization widgets to App Builder. We did the content pump. So let me tell you about the content pump. We had about 6 open source tools, maybe 4 or 5 open source tools for bringing stuff in out of MarkLogic, and you had to use one of them to use the product. So it just seemed to me it made common sense to normalize all this, make a canonical implementation that was supported by the team, tested QA, blah, blah, and would work against the kind of volumes that we were starting to see in the product. The cool thing that they did, they kind of went above and beyond. By the way, MLCP is the command line name, which is RCP. But what happens there is, if you install Hadoop, we have a built-in installation of Hadoop, we install MarkLogic 6. It's like Clark Kent. He comes up in suit, becomes Superman. Everything happens 10 times as fast, as long as Hadoop is there. It's really great. The BI integration, the way we did that was through the thing in the middle, SQL support. So that's another core part of our new surface area. And we had to just do some light, simple layer for doing very simple queries in there. You can do very complex joins, group by, et cetera. With unstructured information, that stuff is incredibly important. And we added the full text query elements that you expect from a real search engine to the SQL. It's our own SQL, but the first pass of it was to make sure it works with common BI tools. What we did there is we hooked the SPY tool up between, say, Tableau or Cognos and our SQL interpreter, and then watch what was going on. And the SQL those things generate is like from Mars. No human being will ever generate this SQL. And it's really hard to interpret it and make sure you can handle it. But once you do, there's a side benefit to this, which I did not expect. I said to the team, don't test the ODBC interface used for this for general distribution because we don't have time, so we didn't do that. But the fact is that to get the BI tools to work, the test suite had to test all kinds of SQL, very hard SQL to manage. So at the end of the day, we're just handing this to people who are able to use it. I've seen ClickView work on top of MarkLogic just fine. I've seen people connect with Excel, all kinds of other things. And they just work. So now we're just telling people where to use it. Okay, this is about the REST and Java APIs. I talked about this already. More than in detail. There's the JSON. Again, I think it's actually, we consider it to be a superset of any JSON database because if you look at, I'll say right now, if you look at the Mongo feature list and capabilities list, it's very good. It's about that long, and ours is about that long. And they're very, very similar systems. One is JSON, ours is MarkLogic, uses XML. And they both use kind of the same sort of internal notions. And in fact, the executive team has got 3 or 4 MarkLogicians there. I think they know what to do for the next 5 to 10 years, what they did before. All right, there's our BI tools. I talked about that already. This is the in-memory, in-database map reduce. We're really proud of this. This is very fast. Everything speeds up by a factor of 100 doing things this way. So we think we're going to see a lot of stuff done this way. Those are the tools we added. I think these are kind of table stakes, but a lot of customers said this is really great. Why didn't you do this years ago? Now this is interesting because one of the things that made MarkLogic difficult to think about in a customer sales situation was you would show it, and you could show multifaceted search, and that's about it. But a lot of these data types lend themselves to a visual representation. So what we did was we created visualization units that know what data type they're talking to in MarkLogic and automatically render an appropriate visualization on the screen. And the way we've done it is they're kind of connected. So they're all connected to your database at the same time. If you put 3 different widgets against the same database, they stay in sync with each other. You can actually manipulate one and cause something to happen in the other. And all that happens automatically. Each of those widgets is inserted into your application with 2 lines of JavaScript. Really like that stuff. There's the content dump. I talked about that. And the Hadoop connector. Hadoop distribution. I'll tell you why we picked them, and it'll relate to the announcement we made today. I don't know if you put anything here about this. today we announced that we've done something kind of interesting, which we built MarkLogic directly on top of HDFS in addition to the file system. So what that means is we have a native code implementation of the server on the file system. It's as wicked fast as ever, but we managed to move it to a Java-based file system that serves as the underpinning storage for Hadoop, and we get very similar performance. We're actually surprised. The caching mechanism for that, I mean, the memory itself takes up this larger, JVMs involved and such, but the performance is quite good. And the reason we did this is because we talked to a number of customers who, quite frankly, didn't want to buy a copy of MarkLogic to store data that they may not look at for 10 years. You know, a lot of this data is archival in nature. So they wanted a place to keep it where it didn't cost them so much for all the nodes. The operational stuff, they're happy to pay for. But something they're not going to look at only episodically, they want some ability to swizzle it in, fault it in on demand. So that's what we've done. That's what we're doing here. The first step is to make MarkLogic work on top of HDFS and to let people play with it. So we announced it this week in the Hadoop world. You can go and get it today. You can download it, try it out, and I believe, if somebody can correct me here, I'm sure you will, that this is the first ACID database sitting on top of HDFS. Say what? Yes. Okay. So we can clap now. I encourage you to go to the website and get it. It's pretty awesome. The reason we're working with Hortonworks is because we actually use MarkMail to figure this out. MarkMail is a multifaceted search tool built on top of our system. You can go to it. We index all the open source email systems out there, all the listservs. And what we were able to do is determine, okay, who has the most contributors or contributors to the Hadoop code base? And that was Hortonworks. By far, by like 3x the number of people out there. They're a lot more busy working on HBase, and obviously we're not that interested in working on that. So we partnered with them. And part of it is, when I look at something like long-term storage, I think, you know, I want the source code, I'm glad I have it, but I want the source code to that system, and I want the source code to the virtual machine that it runs on. I don't want it to be, the processors may be different 10 or 20 years from now. So I want the source code access to all this stuff. And they're an open source company dedicated to open source, and we know they'll do a good job by that code base. It's a perpetuity. So this is the kind of list of things people do with us. We have hundreds of use cases, and we're very, very proud of the company. With a new surface area, we think that a lot of folks are going to discover us, and there should be no fear of using MarkLogic going forward. It's the best NoSQL database out there. So it's the only enterprise NoSQL database out there. Well, that will open it up to argument. I mean, Q&A.
Thank you, MarkLogic, who came out here to give us this incredible presentation. And let's do Q&A. Heads up, everybody. Okay.
Previous slides, counterterrorism.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Just to announce the question. Yes, what's with the counterterrorism in the previous slide?
Remember I said you could, as is, data oiling, you throw anything in there as is, and start to form associations based on what's in there. The big problem from 911 was each 3-letter agency had their own database, with all the different schemas and all their own formats, and they had to very quickly figure out a way to bring that stuff together. I don't know who they picked for that. Get it? But a system like ours is capable of solving that problem. I just can't talk about what we do. But that's, you can imagine that's what it's for.
Next question? Yes.
Two questions. What about the hardware that can use efficiently with MarkLogic and what operating system?
The hardware that's ideal for MarkLogic, and what operating system is also ideal for running MarkLogic?
Yeah, so we release on Linux and Solaris and Windows. It runs great on all those, but by definition, we test them thoroughly whenever we certify a platform. It may run in Debian. We certify on 2 flavors of Red Hat, Solaris and Windows. That's what we certify. For development purposes, about 87% of people use Windows and the rest of them use Macintosh, and it works just fine on there. We use some special workflow launchers and things like that for Macintosh. But there's no deployment on Macintosh.
What about the hardware?
So the hardware, it's made to, so we designed it, and this actually hurts us sometimes on some of these because these aren't value guys that are buying this stuff. We made it so that it runs a commodity hardware. The cheapest hardware you can buy. That's why we did the shared nothing architecture, right? Look, just buy a bunch of cheap hardware, and and add as many nodes as you want. And that'll give you the fault tolerance and replication, et cetera, et cetera. It turns out that banks really like their shared storage and their shared SAN implementations. That's created some challenges for us because to build a shared nothing architecture like this, you'll flip all kinds of network traffic going back and forth for these things to keep the state in sync. And shared SANs don't like that. But we've done some work on that too to make sure they play nice there because we have customers there.
Yes?
Can you talk about how people have used it for social media analysis?
Yes. I did a shared nothing thing, so another customer I can't talk about has 1,000 different feeds going through this thing, all the ones you can think about. And what they're doing is they're watching things like, what's happening with your brand? What's happening with this product? Is uptake really happening? That kind of thing. It's it's the kind of thing you think of normally doing by surveys. They just do this in real time with all these different feeds.
And does the client provide you a set of keywords to then analyze against, or how do people get something meaningful from it?
On ingestion, because it's XML, on the way in, you know that it's XML. It's an XML database, so you tag things as they come in to make them accessible. We have an interface that allows you to plug in, sort of like before you put it in, enrich the data. And the way you enrich it is by going to look, like if you're doing a Twitter feed, you kind of know what the fields are. So you enrich the data saying, hey, here's the geolocation, this tweet came from here. Here's the person's username. We're talking about this product, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
I say, who's using this for reference data management? Or
Reference data management. Who's using reference data management?
we have reference data management as a use case.
Yeah, a lot of the financial service companies are using it for that. In fact, that's been a good thing for us because it's kind of a documentation sort of thing to do. But in fact, once we get in there, they see we're using for these other things like I'm talking about, like trade store, that sort of thing.
Questions? All the way in the back.
How is this different from like data.com or Salesforce.com?
So what?
How is this different from like a data.com or Salesforce.com versus?
How's it different from Salesforce.com and similar products? The question.
Well, Salesforce.com is a CRM system first and foremost and a platform in the cloud. This is enterprise software sold for doing things like that. It would be great to have them as a customer. They would be a kind of a company that would build on top of what we do, as with data.com. It's more like infrastructure for those kinds of companies.
Yes?
How about licensing costs for MarkLogic software compare with, for instance, Oracle?
How does the license cost compare with Oracle?
Yes.
Dirt cheap. Way cheaper. Those guys, but I said, I complained before, right? 1/10. It's for these kinds of problems. Actually, if you go and read extensively why NoSQL exists, it exists because solving these kinds of problems on a relational database, you can work hard and get it to do it, but you're going to buy 10 times the amount of hardware, and you'll spend 10 times the amount of time. And when you're done, it's a completely inflexible system. Going to the question about social network feeds, a new one comes in, then you're going to do a whole new set of tables. It's just not tractable. So it really is kind of driven by the cost of doing, a lot of this is driven by the cost of doing things on relational databases, irrespective of how great the technology is. But actually, to your point, we're usually much cheaper.
Right there?
Yeah, so the word enterprise has come up a lot, and clearly your pricing model is geared towards enterprise. Are you looking at any sort of like hosted, sort of pay-as-you-go based solution for startups and smaller companies to get their feet wet with MarkLogic?
Yes. Are we looking at ways to make the product more approachable by startups and smaller companies? We've talked about a number of things. Some of these could be just programs, where you identify those people through some identified structure like the venture capital community, that kind of thing. I was very good friends with Dan Malone at Microsoft. He started a thing called BizSpark. So I'm kind of inspired by that. We can do that. The other thing we're looking at is kind of a more, I think you mentioned this, a utility/metering approach to pricing. That requires instrumentation of the code that we don't have right now. And finally, we had an AMI for sale, version 4.2. I think we may still do. I don't think we took it down. And that kind of stuff has a lot of appeal to us. The trick with that kind of stuff, when you're actually making money selling your software, is whenever you talk to a company about what they want to do, they always have these euphemisms for it, like, I'd like to control my license costs, which usually translates into, I want to spend 1/10 the amount I wanted to spend before and get the same value that you see up here. And some of it, there's a slider on this to good idea to not fair. And so it's really hard for companies. This is why you see companies going slower than they might on moving stuff to the cloud, because getting that right is really hard. In Microsoft, when we started talking about Azure, Ray Ozzie was in charge, and he gave this speech, which was really inspirational, except when he got to the part where he said, now, there's no question about it, our profit margins are going to go down. We're all going, it's a public company, you can't, because we didn't really have the math figured out for this kind of stuff. So, but let's not miss word. The planet is heading to the cloud. My former CEO is on this, stated publicly, 5 years all our apps will be in the cloud. A friend of mine, my peer at Microsoft, we both left at the same time. He went to Amazon because if you calculate the amount of data that's being stored, because nobody's deleting anything anymore, companies are not going to be able to afford to store that much data in 10 years. So Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, all these guys are going to be selling storage and processing power in the cloud. And we got to be there to provide software for it.
Yes.
What's it mean to be a NoSQL database with ACID compliance and SQL?
So no means is an acronym for not only. But it's fun, one of the things that's interesting about this is why are we just not talking about ourselves that way? And maybe that'll help answer the question. 2 years ago, and 2.5 years ago, when this moniker started thrown around, the CEO of the company quite rightly said, yeah, this is for products with low functionality, that's not us, that are being given away, that's not us, and open source, that's not us. So we can't call ourselves that. But the problem is that over the ensuing 2 years, if you look at the Google Trends and the usage of the term, people now kind of understand it to be key value store, document store, very flexible, auto-sharding. Near as I can tell, one of the big uses of this stuff is how hard it is to shard MySQL instances in huge installations. Particularly in Valley, we do these crazy things all the time and stuff. And so for simpler data stores, but you want them to scale out this stuff, it's not going to be cheap, free software forever. Otherwise, investors aren't going to see a dime. That would make sense. And even established companies are adding NoSQL capabilities to their systems. Oracle has a NoSQL system based on DB. So what it means is it's not only SQL. You want to handle 80% of the world's data, which is not structured in a way that's amenable or amenable well to a relational database. Because again, you can do it. It's very, really expensive. You're gonna want a system like this. It's 80% of the data. You don't want to convert 80% of the data to something structured that's become very fragile because you want to bring up a new social interface. You want it to expand just because you add more machines or just because you add another data feed to the system. And so that's really what it means. It's really something made for the 80% rather than the 20%. Does that make sense? Yes.
So it's kind of a naive question, but suppose I want to download something where I can develop and tinker with it, and I don't have, just like I download any other open source database. I know it's not your case, but suppose I want to start tinkering with it. What tools do you
provide?
provide?
You go to our website, you get your email address, you download it, and you can develop it right.
So you do have a...
yeah, we have what do we call it? Express
40 gigabytes.
Express 40 gigabytes. Yeah.
What's the size of it, sorry?
40 gigabytes.
Oh, like SQL Express kind of thing.
Yeah. A lot of people use it for, really interesting stuff.
Questions?
What about programming languages?
So with the REST API, I think it becomes kind of clear. You write a wrapper facade around the REST API in the language of your choice. We've had guys going off and do Clojure, Ruby, using JRuby. There's one more, I can't remember. That took like 2 or 3 days.
We have time for just one more question. Last question.
Yes.
Okay.
So for the people that know xQuery and whatnot, what's like the path for the company? You guys still going to support xQuery?
Absolutely. We're the #1 supporter of xQuery in the planet. We're the only company investing professional-grade resources in development and testing and documenting successive implementation of what goes in the standard and going beyond the standard. And the reason is, I can talk all I want about surface area, but the core of this thing works because it's an XML database, because it's an xQuery processor. We get a lot of our power from that. So if you want to continue to use it, you can use it. The way I think about it for the other people who don't want to learn this stuff is it's kind of like our PL/SQL, right? You write in Java, you use JVC, you do the normal thing, but if you really want to get the power of a relational database, you're going to use PL/SQL or T-SQL, depending on which system you use. And xQuery will become that for those developers. But if you want to use xQuery, we're the company to do it. No question about it. We love it.
Okay, Gary will be here for one-on-one questions, so if you didn't get the question in, don't worry about it. He's here. I want to do a great big thank you to the Executive Vice President.